Welcome to YogiViews, where my guest is yoga itself, through interviewing those who practice it, teach it, sell it, or simply love it. I am Antonio Sausys. This is the second part of a two-part show where I'm interviewing Rod Stryker. He is popularly known in the States and abroad, has a deep understanding of asana, and yet is rooted in the ancient knowledge and traditions of yoga.
You know, spirit is, being a spiritual person is not the same as being a sensual person. Mm-hmm. Here's what and this is kind of what I see a lot of this, of kind of where yoga also has gone and is going, which is that it's a hyper-sensual environment in which awesome music, awesome environment, awesome clothes, awesome this, awesome that, maybe some awesome pot to go along with the process, you know, and awesome drugs and awesome, you know, it's just this kind of sensual delight. And what I would make the case is that spirituality is not the same as sensuality. In fact, the spiritual journey is an incredibly challenging journey. Whereas a sensual journey is one that we're constantly looking to be comforted. The spiritual journey is one of perfection and self-refinement, self-development, really taking self-responsibility. I talk about it as a journey of fullness and as one that really requires us to grow and to manifest. There's plenty of times in our life where, when it comes to, for example, relationship, where being spiritual will require us to give in a way and reach into a part of ourselves where we never could have imagined, or where we could reach, or where we are, the last thing we want to do is reach there. Mm-hmm. And yet to do so is spiritual. To do so talks to the fullness of who we are. And and that's quite distinct from just looking for what's comfortable and looking for what feels good. When we start talking about that level of fullness and that level of courage and that level of self-resilience and self-empowerment, now we're talking about spirituality, in my eyes. And that's the distinction I make between a spiritual life and a sensual life. And ultimately, yoga is about spirituality. We all want some sensuality along the way, but not to confuse the two. They're quite distinct. And in a sense, sooner or later, where the path of yoga initially gets us into our body and gets us feeling good and gives us all of this kind of elevated self-awareness, eventually it starts to branch off. And the path of spirituality will take us on this journey of uncovering the fullness of who we are and uncovering the fractured parts of ourselves. The sensual journey will just take us into more good music and more fun times. And I would make the case that the reward of the sensual journeys is temporary, and the reward of the spiritual journey lasts for eternity.
Now, I hear you bring up words and concepts such as empowerment, sensuality, courage. I would naturally associate some of those concepts with manhood, with being a man. On the other hand, in the West, and in the United States particularly, yoga is mostly practiced by women. And very few men go to yoga. It's considered kind of a girly thing. Why do you think this happened?
Women are just a little more enlightened than men are. They're a little closer. They're a little closer to themselves, in a sense, you know. And part of it has to do with the conditioning that men bring to the table, relative to whether or not they're interested in something called yoga. The feminine, the divine feminine, and the anima, or the archetype of feminine, is more related to looking inward and more sensitive and more contemplative and
in touch with the emotions.
Yeah, and more curious about their humanity and more honoring of their humanity. Whereas, again, we live in a patriarchal society. The way you become a successful man is you create an external identity. You hold on to that identity. Well, that's really quite an interesting and challenging thing if you are willing to practice spiritual, even a mildly spiritual approach to yoga.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of what culture is asking us to do, because yoga is asking you to go inside and get more full. So as a result, go inside and to explore oneself. So in a way, the very thing that we've been conditioned to do as men is antithetical to what yoga is asking us and requiring us to do, which is to ultimately, at the end of class, for example, is to completely relax and let go. And in fact, forget about your body, forget about the world for a moment, and just feel what's there when all that disappears. So I think that's a key piece of why women have been, you find that women make up about 70% of the yoga population. I think that also is changing. I mean, men are looking for these answers too, and studly guys like you and maybe even me are teaching,
Well, this is influential. I understand that this is influential because then on the other hand, it's true that there's a lot of women teachers that naturally also speak in the classes to the language of women. And to the body of women, and to the endocrinological reality of women. And this, of course, excludes sometimes men. I think that as women teach more, of course, other men feel encouraged. Now, when we go here to the teacher arena, on one hand, for thousands of years, yoga relied on the guru-disciple relationship. Many times when you work on that triangle pose, a Trikonasana, the deep spiritual aspect of that physical pose is to understand the triangularity between you, spirit or God, and the guru, the one that leads the journey there. In our days, on the other hand, a lot of people learn yoga from a book, from a DVD, from a how-to video, and they do learn it, and it's valid as well. What is the role of the teacher in this moment? What's happening with the teachers?
This is one of my favorite subjects. I think it's one of the most critical subjects, really. If yoga is going to evolve, and both of us are leaning in, both of us have a kind of, I think, heartfelt longing for it to continue to grow. And as I understand, it's very much the mission of the show itself that you do.
Yeah.
I think this thing has to be resolved because there's these two worlds. Look, you have heard me say self-empowerment, self-reliance, independence, strength, wholeness, fullness. And yet, and that's ultimately the goal of yoga practice. All of these self-empowerment, self-reliance, standing in the fullness of who you are. On the other hand, as you said, there has been this age-old tradition around receiving yoga from a teacher, in which there's deep-seated love and trust and respect. And so how do those two things, they're almost like two different worlds. Now,
they seem that way.
They seem that way. But what I would say is that in our world, in the Western world, especially in the United States, there are parallels in the history of humankind that are not in the United States. For example, mentorship. When you learned a craft in the old days, you learned to be a blacksmith, you learned to be a bricklayer. You not only learned the craft from a person, you didn't learn it from a manual, but you also interfaced with that person on a personal level. You saw him raise his family. You saw and interacted with this. You entered into this whole larger relationship. And that is all but lost in the United States, this idea of discipleship and mentorship. Also, we don't really have what I think exists in India, and again, it has to do with culture as much as anything else, that we don't have here is this capacity to kind of be in these two worlds at once, where you have the highest respect and love for someone, and yet you're not emotionally codependent on them. We have a tendency to be radically independent. Like, we don't want anyone to really get in our business or know who we are. Many people go to yoga class and don't even want to be taught. They just want, what'd you say? What'd they say in the back? You said it before.
Asana.
Where's the asanas, man? Just give me the asana. We're here for the asana. They don't want to be taught. They just have this independent thing of thinking they know what they want is the same thing as what they need. And what a teacher is meant to do is provide you not only to address your needs versus your wants, But the teacher is also to help you see what you don't know you need yet. What you may not yet want, the teacher knows to give you. So I understand what is a backlash on the guru thing. There have been bad examples of gurus. But I'd also make the case, it's a point I made very early in our conversation when I said, people's expectations of yoga is so low. Mm-hmm. That what's happened is we put people who do not deserve to be called our teacher in the role of our teacher. Mm-hmm. They're really good at asana. They know more asana than I do. They have big classes. Let me make them I won't call them my guru, I'll call them my teacher. Yeah. But the fact is that they don't embody very much of what we're talking about of the larger context of yoga. My two experiences with teachers have been life-changing, radically supportive, radically empowering. At the same time, I had to learn about my own process of projection, And, people shy away from it, not just because there have been bad gurus, but because of the difficulty there is in walking this path of having someone whom you look to for guidance, and yet you don't get emotionally wrapped up in. Mm-hmm. If you get wrapped up in it, you're sure to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. If you're looking to the teacher as an emotional crutch, you're definitely going to get hurt. And you really set up both the teacher and yourself for trouble. My own approach has been really, in the way I focus my teacher trainings, is to really help people who are far along as teachers or who are aspiring to become teachers to one day actually be worthy of being called a teacher. I'd say most people who teach yoga in the United States I call them yoga instructors.
Instructors, which I agree with you.
They're not teachers. They're not teachers. They're yoga instructors.
These 200-hour programs.
Yeah. And the other thing is, some of them I would call them yoga conductors. Or yoga DJs, Yeah. And I'm being very blunt, but, I'm getting older, so we don't have much time to waste anymore. But the truth is that, don't put someone in the role of teacher who really isn't qualified to be there. There are a few gems, but they're not many. Look for someone who embodies what they teach, who understands the scope of it, who they themselves have had a teacher, who has had a teacher. And, be sure that your teachers had a teacher and your teacher's teachers had a teacher. And then you begin to know that the teacher is not someone whose job it is to make things up. It's to, as best they can and precisely as they can, provide their students with what they learned from something that has roots and that's been time tested. Again, I think this is a critical thing for our contemporary yoga to resolve and to come to terms with. If it's going to advance, it's got to be on the backs or really on the shoulders of tradition and on the shoulders of something that's been used and practiced for thousands of years, not 20, not 10. And then we start having something authentic that will truly change lives.
Which is the hope and the action of yoga. When you practice it in a deep way, it really changes your perception of life. That would be a much better way of naming some of these people that really want to do it. Many of them. Also, many others are thinking of a change of career, leaving corporate America. I'll teach yoga.
Be a yoga teacher.
Yeah, I'll be a yoga teacher. It's great.
Absolutely.
So it involves a lot more than that. Yes, and that is important. If you were to mention, because it is normal to think that when something develops deeply, it's because it is satisfying a need in the society, in the times, in the climatological reality, whatever it is. There is a reason, perhaps, why yoga is now so popular again and going everywhere. If you were to say 3 things that yoga is bringing to our modern men, to our society, to our state as humanity, what would you say those things are in your opinion?
You know, the first thing I think of is community. I think that one of the reasons yoga has become as popular as it has is because it's a unique opportunity for community. And if you look at the dynamic of yoga studios, of yoga classes, they're, in a sense, meeting points in a society that has less and less of those communal, tribal interfaces. So we have yoga festivals and not even taking away the larger events. You just look at Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Probably 80-90% of the people were there last Saturday at that time. And it creates this interface. It also is a touch point for people. And when I say touch point, I mean a kind of opportunity to reorient yourself in time and space, in a culture and in a time where it's all going so fast. We hear so much, there's so much news, there's so much information. Literally, you and I could pick up our phone and just about get any piece of history or any sporting event or anything. And yet, the actual touchstone of familiarity, of home, is so lacking in our culture. And so I think that's a key point. I actually think community is huge. There's no doubt that I would also make the case that the way society is today, you know, it's helpful to remember that our anatomy, really our physiology, our physiological functioning has not evolved from more than 1 million years ago. Mm-hmm. Same anatomy, same physiology. Our responses to getting fired or feeling our jobs threatened is the same as if you and I were to see a tiger. Basically, the same hormones are released. Yeah. Fundamental fear, this fight or flight response triggers these things. That still exists. It's always been at work. And it will be for some time in the future. And I think our society and our culture is more stressed out than ever. And so there are certain physiological needs that we have that yoga has helped to address. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because on the one hand, we've seen that the strongest wave that happened, that really made yoga popular, was kind of vinyasa. Very active, very intense, made you sweat a lot, turned up the heat in case you weren't sweating quite enough in the room to promote it. But do you know what the biggest movement now is toward? Restorative yoga. Mm-hmm. What started out 10, 12, 15 years ago as being kind of just a few people in the Bay Area with a couple bolsters is now in every studio across the United States I go to.
Along with the emergence of yoga therapy.
Of yoga therapy, exactly.
As a modality that uses restorative yoga.
So, and the restorative yoga and yoga therapy, both are going to begin to put an emphasis on working with the nervous system in such a way that really is an antidote for so much of the impact of modern life. So we have community, we have physiology of yoga, and then the third piece, I think, is just us trying to find that thing that's going to help us fulfill the deeper meaning and purpose of life. And lo and behold, as I said, yoga, even if it is a basic asana class, somehow speaks to that in some deep, subtle level. Yeah. Because the bottom line is, there are more effective forms of exercise. You get on a treadmill, never mind for an hour and a half, which is how long a yoga class lasts, typically. You get on a treadmill or you swim. Let's swim for half an hour, let alone an hour and a half. You're going to get more exercise value than you are from a yoga class. You know, everyone likes to think that yoga has all this great physiological benefits. It does, but not like swimming, not like cross-country skiing, not like tons of other exercise. I think that glimpse we get at the end of a good class, where we feel this relief, we feel this unwinding of stresses, basic stress. What happens is it just touches enough on that fundamental hunger we all have. You know, that longing to know more of who we are, to become the master of our own life, our destiny. I think that somehow it speaks to that. So for me, those are the big ones. Yeah, you can make the case that it gets you in your body and people are disconnected from their body. But I think the bigger thing.
Well, there's certainly many other reasons, but those are the three for you, which was my interest and something like, of course, people want to know. You've mentioned yoga therapy and restorative yoga. What do you think is the future of yoga at large? Not just in sense of, you know, what's going to happen Because some of these fancies, this fashion things,
Yeah.
then they go.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. I was interviewed about last year sometime, and I was asked a question, it's not dissimilar from that. And I heard myself saying something that I'd never given any thought to before. And afterwards I went, oh yeah, I was right, that was well said. What I actually heard myself saying, and I'll repeat here, is that I think we've seen the apex of the popularity of yoga. I think it's passed. The statistics bear that out. Last year, $1 billion less dollars was spent on yoga. And you know, the economy turned 4, 5, 6 years ago. So it's not an economic thing. I think this, I don't want to say, how do we put it? Yoga for the sake of yoga. You just put up a yoga sign and you put on cool music and now people are going to gyrate to the hits. I think those days, in terms of sheer numbers of people doing it, have passed. It's essentially, we've seen the apex. But what will happen is what you introduced at the beginning of the show. People are turning to something, you know, looking to what can be deeper, how yoga can affect them in a more deep way. In a sense, making a bigger commitment to themselves by willing to be still, by willing to meditate, by willing to explore the actual teachings that explain so much of why we experience what we experience in the world. Yoga has just such extraordinary models by which, philosophical and theoretical models, by which we understand ourselves more and better. Why are parts of me disparate? Why are parts of me separated? Why am I disconnected if I'm so enlightened? I think that that philosophical piece, combined with a kind of exploring modalities beyond asana. And by the way, we're also getting older, and you know, enough people get hurt in yoga class, or they're not finding the results they wanted from asana. They expected that asana was going to give it to them all, and they're not getting it. So I strongly believe that the number of people starting to go into deeper approaches, more holistic approaches, people, you know, that speak to their spirit as much as it does to their body, those numbers will grow. And they are, as we speak, they are growing as we speak.
Well, that would be a great thing to happen. What is your personal next frontier?
My next frontier? Well, you know, my own frontier, I guess it'd be twofold. One is, for myself, it really is to deepen my own practice. And I've made a commitment to that over the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and it's just bearing extraordinary fruit. You know, it really is. And I've got a full life, 4 children, a wife, and a flourishing business, and more students than I've ever had.
A lot of traveling.
A lot of traveling. But I made a critical decision to practice, you know, to sit and to meditate specifically more. And you know, I intend to have a very active life and a very creative life, but it really was, it's really been a wonderful decision to make. In kind of interfacing with all these responsibilities is this idea to delve deeper into meditation and into my own practice. And so that's my own personal frontier. I would say part 2 of that on a practical level then is the next book. But that's not easy to do, you know, given all the responsibilities and everything else. Yes, it's the next book, and really just to really provide people with this, a book that on this kind of yoga that we've talked about tonight.
Another one.
Of Tantra.
Because you've written one already, and I do hope to have you again about that book very soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, so another book.
Another book. And this would be on really authoritative approach to Tantric yoga. Understanding asana, pranayama, meditation, how these things fit together, how teachers who have in fact developed the skill to instruct yoga can move into teaching yoga, how they can bring these these more powerful and subtle dimensions into their practice and into their teaching, how you can give students more of what they need and address the unique qualities, unique needs of the students, kind of really the energetics of yoga and the whole spiritual piece. And then also next year I'll start putting some stuff online. We're going to start filming some of these basic foundational trainings in this kind of material and creating an online platform for it. So it's all good, as long as I have my health and a practice. I feel incredibly blessed and privileged, and honored that people want to listen to what I have to say and will practice it. So I'll stay focused on that.
And so, if people want to know more about you, where should
that's
they
easy. The website is ParaYoga, parayoga.com, P-A-R-A, and there's also we have a second website that's actually the heart of centered around the book, which is called rodstryker.com, ParaYoga or rodstryker.com. Either one.
All right. Rod, what a pleasure. I was looking forward to seeing you guys the few times we've shared time before, and when I've interviewed you at festivals or, I always wanted more, so I'm happy. I still do.
Me too.
I still want more, but
even if the cameras aren't here, let's go have dinner.
But, we got to do something good. I'm very glad. I thank you for coming to the studio today and for being here for the show. And I wish you the best, both personally and professionally. I somehow trust that it will happen for you, and that's my wish.
Thank you, Antonio. I appreciate it.
Thank
you very much.
Rod Stryker is the founder of ParaYoga and the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom, and also a blogger for the Huffington Post. He has taught for more than 30 years, training teachers and leading workshops throughout the world. He met yoga master Kavi Yogiraj Mani Finger and his son Yogiraj Alan Finger, whom he studied for 20 years and is currently a disciple of Pandit Rajmani, as spiritual head of the Himalayan Institute. I hope you liked our show today, and if you care to let me know, shoot me an email at antonio@yogiviews.com. I look forward to seeing you the next time.